In the last video, I briefly introduced the topic of minor keys, and I'd like to use this video to take a deep dive into that subject. We're going to break the discussion down into three subtopics, which you see on the slide in front of you. First, we'll talk about major and minor scales and how they relate to one another. Next, we'll talk about the three types of minor scales. Yes, there are three. And finally, we'll talk about the triads that those three minor scales produce, which will give us the triads in minor keys. So our first subtopic is the relationship between major and minor scales. So you want to know how major and minor scales are related? Well, the simplest answer is that if you start on note 6 of a major scale, you will get a minor scale. And we'll do an example because you obviously want one. And here's the example. By the way, we call this concept relative minor. Every major scale has a minor scale that uses the exact same notes, but in a different order. In this particular case, we're looking at a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and we see that if we start on the 6th note of this scale, which is A, we end up with an A minor scale, spelled A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Now you might ask, wait a minute, those are exactly the same notes. How is that a different scale? Well. The answer is that your brain perceives all of these notes in the context of their relationship to the first one played. In other words, when you hear a C major scale, you hear a C first, and all the other notes that are after that, your brain is constantly sort of checking back and listening to what they sound like in relation to the first one played. And because of the series of whole steps and half steps created, and their relationship back to that original note, you get the distinctive sound of the major scale. It works the same way with minor scales. If we start on A, the whole steps and half steps that follow A, when we go up A, B, C, D, E, F, G, create the sound of the minor scale. And next we'll look at what those whole steps and half steps are. But before we do that, I'm going to play the two scales to prove to you that they are indeed a different sound. Here's the C major scale. And here is the A minor scale. Very clearly different scales. So in front of you, you see the recipe, or perhaps you could say the formula for the minor scale. Just like major scales, minor scales have a specific order of whole and half steps to follow to create their unique sound. This particular type of minor scale, which is directly related to the major scale, as we saw before, is called the natural minor scale. If we look at the intervals within the A minor scale that we derived from C major, we'll see the intervals for every other natural minor scale as well. So that's why we have numbers there in the third line. It's just showing that if you look at the notes sort of as generic, I guess you could say placeholders, and you're focusing on the whole steps and half steps that are in between the notes, you could start on any note you want, and as long as you go by that series of whole steps and half steps, you'll be creating a minor scale starting on that note. So the series of intervals here to remember is whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. Remember that on your guitar, a whole step is equal to 2 frets, and a half step is equal to 1. Also really important to remember here if you're trying to figure out other scales that between B and C is always a half step, and also between E and F, that's also a half step. Those are the pairs of notes that do not have sharps or flats in between them. So remember that if you're trying to use this information on your own to figure out some more minor scales. Before we move on to the three types of minor scales, I'd like to talk about one more relationship between major and minor scales, and that's called parallel minor. And this is just basically a minor scale starting on the same note as a particular major scale, and how you can convert that major scale into a minor scale. And all you do is you take your major scale and you lower notes 3, 6, and 7 of that scale by a half step. In some cases that means adding a flat. In other cases, that means removing a sharp. It just depends on what you're starting with. In any case, if you do that, you will get a minor scale on the same root note as the major. Our example here is the C major scale, and as you can see, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Notes 3, 6, and 7 of that scale are E, A, and B. And if we flat those notes and change nothing else, we get the C minor scale, which is spelled C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, and C. So E, A, and B are notes 3, 6, and 7. They were flatted, which lowered them by a half step, and that gave us the C minor scale. Very simple, very easy to remember, 3, 6, 7. Now, as promised, we're going to talk about the three types of minor scales, or the three kinds of minor. The first of which we've already talked about. That's the natural minor scale, discovered earlier by deriving it from the C major scale by starting on note 6, so that we play from A to A, all natural notes. The second type of minor scale is the harmonic minor scale, and we can get that from the natural minor scale very easily by simply raising the 7th note up by a half step. The third is the melodic minor scale. This one is a little strange. We raise notes 6 and 7, but only on the way up the scale, only when ascending. When we go back down, we play it the same as we would play a natural minor scale. So in this case, the F sharp and the G sharp would go back to being F natural and G natural. For contrast, I'm going to play all three types of scales now. First, the natural minor. Second, the harmonic minor with the raised 7th. As you can hear, it sounds a little more exotic when played this way. Third, the melodic minor, played with the raised 6th and 7th note ascending, but returning those notes back to natural on the descent. So it might seem a little strange in concept, but the melodic minor actually sounds quite good when you play it that way. So for our third and final topic of discussion, we are going to look at the triads created by the notes of the minor scales, the three different types of minor scales that we previously discussed. Starting, of course, here with natural minor. The triads in A natural minor are actually the same as the triads in C major, except, of course, that A minor is now the 1. So here's the sound of the A minor triad. Here is the B diminished triad, the C major triad, the D minor triad, the E minor triad, the F major triad, and finally the G major triad. And if you're not sure why those triads are major, minor, or diminished, go back to the first video in the series and do a little review, and I'm sure you soon will be back to full understanding. Now, when we get to harmonic minor, things get quite a bit more interesting because of that raised 7th tone. In this case, in the key of A minor, the 7th tone is G, so all of the chords that had a G in them before are now going to have a G sharp in them, which will of course change what kind of chord they are. The first chord that's affected this way is the 3 chord. In the key of in the key of A minor, using the natural minor scale, that chord was major, but now we've raised the G up to a G sharp, and this is going to give us a C augmented triad. The next chord that's affected by this change is the 5 chord. Again, when we raise G to G sharp, in this case the 5 chord, which was E minor, becomes E major. Finally, the last chord that's affected when we change G to G sharp is the 7th chord of the scale. It was G major when we were back in natural minor, but now that we've raised the G to G sharp, it becomes G sharp diminished. So changing one note of the scale actually has quite an impact on the types of triads that scale will give you. In this case, it's affected 3 different chords. And we'll see even more of that when we get on to melodic minor. However, before that happens, I'm going to play the triads from this harmonic minor scale for you. Here's the A minor triad. Here's the B diminished triad. The C augmented triad. The D minor triad. The E major triad. The F major triad. The G sharp diminished triad. And let's just go ahead and resolve that to A minor. And here we are, the triads in melodic minor. Now all of the triads that had G's in them that got changed to G sharps for harmonic minor, those are all going to be the same. So we still have our 3 chord as a C augmented, we still have our 5 chord as an E major, and we still have our 7 chord as a G sharp diminished. However, now that we have the F sharp, the raised 6th tone that's present in the melodic minor on the ascent, we're going to get some other changes because all of the chords that had F in them now have F sharp. And this starts with the 2 chord. We can see there that our 2 chord is now a B minor because of the F sharp. We can see that the 4 chord, with the F being raised to F sharp, has become D major. It used to be D minor. And finally, we can see that the 6, whose root note was actually F and has now become F sharp, changes to an F sharp diminished triad. So quite a few changes in melodic minor when it comes to the triads. For your reference, I'll play each of these triads. Here's the A minor triad, the B minor triad, the C augmented triad, the D major triad, the E major triad, the F sharp diminished triad, and the G sharp diminished triad. And let's just resolve that to A minor. And that about wraps up this video, friends. I appreciate you watching. I hope you learned a lot about all of our little subtopics, the relationship between major and minor scales, the 3 kinds of minor scales, and of course the triads which they produce. Our next video will cover the rules for chord progressions in minor keys. We'll go through some examples and put all of this new knowledge that you've gained in this video into use. In the meantime, I hope you do some on your own, write out some minor scales, figure them out on your guitar, maybe even figure out how to play some of those triads that we worked on. Thanks again for watching. Again, this video is sponsored by the Sacramento Guitar Society, and from my channel, I certainly hope you like this video, subscribe to my channel, and give me some comments down there. If you have questions, ask them in the comments. If you have comments about the video or ideas for other videos on harmony-related topics, I'd appreciate your feedback. Thanks again. Bye-bye.